what was going on in our world in 2007, the last time that Alabama was a home dog.
College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. I believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the Joel Klatt Show. I am Joel Klatt. The show is presented by Hampton by Hilton. We have got picks. We have got previews today. We're ready to get things rocking on what is, I think, promising to be a really great college football weekend. So just some housekeeping. Remember to rate and review us, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and listen to us. And then make sure to go over to the YouTube page and subscribe to the YouTube page. Leave a comment below. The question yesterday I'll still pose is, would you like us to start kind of a Football Schematics 101 series on the YouTube page? Leave a comment below whether you'd want us to do that or not, or any idea for some of the content that you would love to see exclusive on YouTube. Get over there and subscribe. You can follow us on social media at Joel Klatt Show. Wherever you like to social media, we are there. Okay, I think that we've got some great games here to talk about. An obvious one with the Georgia-Bama game that we'll get to. I'm going to be doing Michigan and Minnesota on Big Noon Saturday in Ann Arbor. So that's where I'll start. Before we get to the picks, let me get to just kind of the preview of this Michigan-Minnesota game. The question that we have, I think, is, did Michigan get their identity back? Now, we talked a lot about this on Monday, and that's really the question leading into this game. That grinded out style of win against USC was certainly something that you would say is philosophically consistent with what Michigan has been over the last couple of years. I don't think any team, specifically last season, has done any better than Michigan in terms of playing complementary football. When all of the elements come together, the ability to run the football, protect the defense, own the field position and win the field position battle, win the turnover margin battle. In fact, if you look at those two categories, which are just vital categories, average net field position and turnover margin, nobody was better last year when Michigan won the national championship and went 15-0. So they went back to a little bit of that mode and said, let's get back to the blueprint. And they did that against USC. They went to Alex Orji as quarterback, and they ran the football 46 times, only 12 passes against USC. Now, it should be noted, when you watch the film, they weren't dominant in the run game outside of a few runs that popped. I think that USC could probably take away some quality things from what they did defensively. I thought that they played really well up front for the most part. The problem is that when you face a good team like Michigan that has backs with the power of Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, they get one crease and it can go the distance. They break one tackle and it's a big play. So it's not enough. This is not horseshoes and hand grenades here. You can't just say, hey, we were close to being great in the run defensive game against Michigan, because they will test you series in and series out. And that looks to be the philosophy that they're going to use for the foreseeable future. The passing game, will it look different this week? I'm not totally sure. It'll be interesting to see whether Colston Loveland is healthy and back in the lineup. He missed last week's game, and there was very little to speak of as far as downfield production, threat, any of the above. They only threw the ball for 32 yards. Sharon said he was close to playing last week. I would assume that he would probably be on the field. Marlon Klein is the tight end that filled in for Loveland. He had a catch for 4 yards. So here's what you see when you turn on the game film, is that when there is no threat, and I'm talking specifically about personnel, because I think that Michigan, their scheme trying to throw the football is not bad, but they've got personnel deficiencies, both in terms of the quarterback's ability to throw the football and the wide receiver group in general with their ability to threaten and get open down the field. So here's what happens when that's the case, is that you get a defense that can just play man coverage with one safety back, and they can play a heavy run box. They have an extra player in the run box on almost every single snap. And they don't have a lot of fear that those players on the outside are dynamic enough to create an explosive play when they're in man defense. And more power to them. And that's essentially what USC was able to do. Now, in certain spots during that game, 3rd and longs, they were able to also play zone and put eyes in the backfield and not allow the deep crossers and so on and so forth, because Michigan tried. Michigan would condense the set and try to throw a big, heavy play action. But the difference is that there's not a conflict defender because they're in man. Why can they be in man? Because there's not a threat on the outside. So that's going to hurt Michigan as the season goes on. That film is out there, and I'm sure that Minnesota will have a little of that in their game plan for this Saturday. Minnesota is 2-2. They're coming off a loss to Iowa. They were up 14-7 in that game, by the way, at the half before they just kind of fell apart in the second. They were outscored 17-0. And the concern for Minnesota is that they got worn down steadily, in particular on the ground. Okay, so this Minnesota team gave up a lot of yards to Iowa and Caleb Johnson, their running back, on the ground. You look at what Caleb Johnson did, 200 yards. He leads the country in total rushing yards, which you could say, like, hey, maybe it's just a great player, but there's also some concern there because Iowa is not going to threaten you with some great down-the-field passing game either. So it is a very similar style of game that Minnesota is going to be asked to play this Saturday as they were last Saturday. We're going to see if their defense can get any better in terms of stopping the run. For them offensively, Darius Taylor, he's averaged over 100 yards per game in his young career, I would call it. This is his sophomore season. So when he's been healthy, he's been productive for them. He's their running back, and we'll see if Minnesota is able to strike fear in the Michigan defense, because that Michigan defense is elite. It's still elite. And if they are protected like they were in the first half against USC, USC could not move the ball at all. When they were exposed to more snaps in the second half and they got worn down and they got tired and they had to substitute, that's when you saw USC really start to get it going offensively. That spread, by the way, is Michigan favored by 9.5 at home over Minnesota. Gus, Ginny, and I will be there for Big Noon Saturday. But remember, Big Noon kickoff is in Orlando for the UCF Colorado game. That'll be right preceding our game. Okay, let's start getting into the picks. And I'm going to take a quick sip of my hot tea here. So picks didn't go well last week against the spread. I am now 11-10 against the spread. So I'm not a bettor. I've never bet in my life. 11-10, I guess, is okay. No? Yes? It's okay. We're not losing money. We're not losing money. They're better this week. Last week, I didn't love it. I was 2-3 last week. I didn't love it. Like, I got done with the show and I was like, you know what? I want to take a couple of those picks back. Now, I will say, if you're betting outright, I am 16-5 outright in terms of just picking winners. I'll give you the score, and then you can do with that what you want as far as whether you like my pick outright or you like my pick against the spread. All right, so here we go. Let's get into it. Georgia is a 2.5-point favorite at Alabama. Just to give you an idea, and I was banging around and Bear, Chris Felica, Bear Bets podcast right here. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. He had this great graphic on his podcast, so I wanted to show it on our show here. This is kind of a graphical representation of what was going on in our world in 2007, the last time that Alabama was a home dog. So it's 2007. The number one movie is Spider-Man 3. Number one song is Irreplaceable by Beyonce. Look at the average gas price, $2.85. Can we get back to that? That'd be nice. Tebow was the Heisman Trophy winner. American Idol was the number one TV show. I remember that. We all remember that. That's what was going on the last time Alabama had to roll into their home stadium, Bryant-Denny, as a home dog. And here we go. Georgia rolls into town as a 2.5-point favorite. Remember, Bama was favored even in that Joe Burrow game. They were favored in the Texas game last year. And those are the only two losses that they've had in their last 61. So Bama's 59-2 in their last 61 home games. That goes back to 2015. So that 19 Burrow LSU team, they beat them in Tuscaloosa. And last year, the Ewers Texas team, they beat them in Tuscaloosa as well. The Tide have their planned 5, I would say like their starting 5 offensive linemen, they're back. We saw that against Wisconsin, and I thought that was actually a huge deal for them. The way they played as an offensive line against South Florida was far different than the way they played as an offensive line against Wisconsin. So getting those tackles back was huge for them. And we saw that starting offensive line, and I think that that's going to create even more explosive runs and the ability, and this is important, the ability to sustain drives. I think they'll have less penalties as a group up front, and they'll have more base down success running the football for 3, 4, and 5 yards, which can keep them on schedule and allow them potentially to sustain a long drive. That was one of the questions that I've had with Alabama, and I think that getting that starting offensive line back is going to continue to help them. Now, Milroe, his stats against Georgia last year in the SEC championship game are not going to blow your mind, but he made some huge plays in that game. Remember, Bama beat Georgia in that game, and he had 2 touchdowns, 192 passing yards, and only 29 on the ground. But remember, in our game, for some reason, we haven't adjusted this. Sacks count against your rushing yards as a quarterback. So if you really strip out the sacks from that game, which there were 4 of them on Milroe, he actually ran it for 67 yards. And if you're telling me like there's hidden yards in there for 67 yards, that's a few first downs, obviously, for the game. That's an impactful day from Jalen Milroe. I think that this guy has improved even from last year. They're highly explosive in the passing game because of what's going on the outside. I love Ryan Williams. This is an offense that creates a lot of big plays, a ton of them. And I think that's going to be a big deal. Meanwhile, on that Georgia side, their defense is banged up a little bit. Mykel Williams hasn't played since leaving the Clemson game. Now, he's a potential top 10 pick, and when I'm reading the things that Kirby Smart has said and listening to some of his comments this week, he's saying he's hopeful that Mykel is going to come back, but he's not overly confident in that, which means I don't love that. You start rolling into these matchup style games. When I say matchup games, it's like talent is equated here, okay? So these are matchup games. You are matched up evenly against the opposition, which is not generally the case in college football. In these matchup games, injuries matter to a great deal. I do think it is strength against strength. Check this out. Bama's offense has 11 touchdowns right now of 25 or more yards. I was just speaking to that with their explosive plays. That's tied for the most in college football. Again, 11 touchdowns of 25 or more yards. Georgia on defense, conversely, is a team that does not give up the explosive play. And you would obviously anticipate that with not only their skill level, but also their schematic advantage with a guy like Kirby. They haven't allowed explosives really all year. Only 1 pass play of 20 yards all season. So now you get kind of a strength against strength matchup. And I can't wait to see how that pans out. Because largely, Bama has not had to drive the length of the field in order to score. I don't think that's a weakness. It's just something that we haven't seen. So maybe we have to see that this week, which is why I started with the offensive line in terms of sustaining drives. We might have to see Jalen Milroe and Alabama sustain some drives in order to get points in this one. On the opposite side of this, let's take a look at when Georgia has the ball and Bama's on defense. And the question that I have, and I think everybody should have, is can Georgia take advantage of big play opportunities against this Bama secondary? Now, if you're just looking at this, you would probably say like, it's questionable. Nobody for the Bulldogs has more than 2 catches of over 25 yards right now through 3 games. So do they have that downfield threat? See, I don't think it's been a great transition post Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. So while you still have Carson Beck, it's very different for a quarterback to roll out there with a skill position group that I think has taken a bit of a step backwards. That doesn't mean they're not talented, and maybe that they're going to start to produce, but it's not proven by any stretch of the imagination. And through three games, we haven't really seen it from an explosive standpoint. And I actually think that's where you have to attack Alabama. They're very strong in just like the interior of their defense, their athleticism, their aggressiveness. They're a really good defense. I like what Bama does defensively. However, the holes that I've seen on film when I was preparing for the Wisconsin game and then even in the Wisconsin game were twofold. The perimeter run game is there to be had, in particular if your quarterback is willing to run on the outside. That's there. Even the Ches Malusi fumble against Alabama, that was a big gain before he put the ball on the turf. And then the other side of this is that there are wide receivers open behind the secondary for Bama, and we've seen that over multiple weeks. The difference is that South Florida and Wisconsin were unable to connect. So we don't sit here and lament the big plays that Alabama gave up, although they were there to be had. So can Georgia, even with a group that has not shown a proclivity to explosive plays, can they create them in this game? I actually think that is the entire key to the game. And I know it's tough to do that on the road, and they're going to be playing in an environment that is incredibly tough to play in. But the ability to create explosives is, one, the fastest way to quiet an opposing crowd down, and it will immediately give everybody a lot of concern on that sideline because this is what has popped up previously on film. Remember that secondary for Alabama. Malachi Moore is back, and then when they're in nickel, any situation where there's 3 or more wide receivers on the field, when they're in nickel defense, they get an extra defensive back on the field. There's 5 defensive backs. 4 of them are new this year. 2 transfers, 2 true freshmen. Very talented, great players, new together. Now, maybe this has been fixed over the course of an off week. Maybe. But if I'm Georgia, I've got to attack, and I've got to go down the field in order to see what's going on. Their offensive line is obviously dealing with that huge injury to their guard, probably the best guard in the country, one of the top offensive linemen in the country, Tate Ratledge. He underwent tightrope surgery on his ankle. He will be out. Carson Beck had an AC joint sprain in his non-throwing shoulder. I actually don't think that that's an issue at all because I dealt with that both in my throwing shoulder and non-throwing shoulder. He should be fine. That's just a pain management style of deal. And the last thing I'll say is, like, maybe Georgia's defense looks a little bit better now that we've seen Clemson explode offensively. And we remember back to that week 1 game and we're like, oh yeah, they were totally bottled up by this Georgia defense. All right, so let's get to the pick. That was a lot going on for that game. So what's the pick, Joel? Georgia's the favorite on the road at Alabama. Here's where it comes down to. I told you that the key was Georgia being able to create and hit on those explosives when they potentially arrive, and yet I have no evidence that they're going to be able to do that. So I'm riding with the tide. I think Alabama wins. Milroe plays well, and I think Alabama wins a classic, a tight ball game, and it's going to be 24-21 at home. Bama wins and covers. Illinois at Penn State. This should be a good one right here. Now, this is not the whiteout game at Penn State, although James Franklin has called for whiteout energy. I don't know if that's official. Is that an official thing? I don't know. That smells like we should start a beverage company here at the Joel Klatt Show, and we should sell at Penn State whiteout energy drinks. Should we do that? Again, not the whiteout game. Okay, that's coming later, I believe, against Washington. But James Franklin has called for whiteout energy, and they might need it, because this Illinois team is really good. Illinois is now ranked 19th in the country. Penn State is in the top 10, and they're favored by 17.5. This is one of those where I'm like, okay, hold on. And I start scratching my head and rubbing my temples, and I'm thinking to myself, 17.5? That seems like a lot, so let's walk through the game. Illinois is off to that hot start. They're a 4-0 start. Now they head out there against Penn State. I called this matchup last year in Champaign. Illinois was transitioning. Remember, a couple of years ago, Brett Bielema had a really solid team. Last year, they were transitioning. It did not go well for them. But this year, it looks like they have gotten right in the right areas. The last time Illinois went to Penn State, they won that 9-overtime thriller. Do you remember that game? I was kind of in the range. 9 overtimes. Maybe we're going to get something like that. I do like Illinois. They are coming off a win against Nebraska in a really hostile environment on the road at night during a weeknight on a Friday night. And generally speaking, road teams don't win on Friday night. Last week was such an anomaly. Stanford won at Syracuse and Illinois won at Nebraska. Credit to those 2 programs. I love Illinois' coaching staff. I really do. I believe the offensive coordinator's name is Lunny, and his plan against Nebraska was terrific. Luke Altmaier was terrific in that game, and Luke has been really good during the course of the year. Only 10 touchdowns, and I should say 10 touchdowns and only no interceptions. He has not turned the ball over as far as interceptions go. Their leading receiver is a guy that is banged up, and his name is Zachary Franklin, 6-year transfer from Ole Miss and UTSA. He left that Nebraska game. Sounds like he could be good to go in this one. That's something to monitor. We'll see what's going on. But this is a team that I believe is a veteran team. They're a tough team. I think it's going to be really tough for Penn State. Now, let's talk about Penn State. This whole idea to start the year of their new offensive coordinator and what he would mean to this team. He needed to create an offense that could be more explosive and get the best out of the quarterback, Drew Aller. To this point in the season, both of those things have been achieved. Now, you could say like, hey, Joel, they haven't played anyone. It's like the most tired college football argument. They haven't played anybody. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. They have done to those opponents what they should do for the most part. The Kotelnicki influence is working. Penn State is 5th in the country in yards per play. Drew Aller is 5th in the country in air yards per pass attempt. Last year, he was down almost dead last in qualifying quarterbacks in the country. So now this strong-armed kind of statue quarterback that's not going to run it a lot, he's doing what he should be doing, which is getting the ball downfield. 5th in the country in air yards per pass attempt. So Andy Kotelnicki, I'm telling you, put it on your watch. Every 5 to 10 plays, he's taking a shot down the field. It's happening. The run game for Penn State is dynamic. These two guys are incredible players. Singleton, Allen, they're averaging 255 yards per game. That's 10th in college football. Singleton is averaging 105 on 8.5 a carry. Remember, this is a guy that, as a true freshman, was explosive, led the Power 5 in terms of explosive touchdowns, touchdown runs over 40 yards. I think 7 he had. He did not have any last year. In their first game right away against West Virginia when we were there, boom, a 40-plus yard touchdown run, and that has continued. So this is a guy that has continued to flash this year what we expected last year and saw in his true freshman year. Again, 8.5 per carry. They did lose a safety, KJ Winston, to a long-term injury, so we'll see how that impacts their defense. Tyler Warren has been their leading receiver this season, twice as many catches as any player on the team. A player that needs to step up for them is a guy that they talked a lot about it in the preseason, and in particular before that first week game, Trey Wallace. Trey Wallace has got to step up. He's got just 3 catches over his last 10 quarters of play. That's going to need to change. Penn State beat up on Kent State last week, 56-0. Kent State has the worst scoring defense in the country. They're going to be seeing a much different defense this week. Illinois, their style is aggressive. They do a great job. Aaron Henry is their defensive coordinator, a really good defensive coordinator that I like a lot as a young coach. He will be a head coach at some point in his career. I really like Aaron Henry, and he will mix up man and zone coverage, primarily a man team, and they're going to try to take it to Penn State, make the windows tight for Drew Aller to throw into. So where am I sitting on this? 17 is too much. Penn State wins. They get the whiteout energy that James Franklin is looking for in a very tough environment. And I think Penn State wins by 10, 27-17. Nittany Lions stay perfect. Oklahoma at Auburn. This is an interesting one. Oklahoma off of that dud of a game against Tennessee at home, in which their offense looked, I'll be honest, like awful. And by the way, just all of it. Their quarterback play was bad. Their offensive line play was bad. Their game plan was bad. All of it was bad. And Brent Venables has touched on that this week, talking about last week's game and their offensive futility. Oklahoma ran into a really good team. I get it, but their plan for Tennessee was not adequate at all. Venables made the call, though. And again, I will pound the table. Jackson Arnold was problematic, but he was not the only problem on that offense. And if you ask anybody that's watched the film, they will tell you that exact thing. If you want to bench him, okay, that's fine because his play was problematic. You can't turn the football over. You can't panic and throw the ball backwards. You can't fumble the ball inside the 5-yard line when you're going in to score and potentially tie the game. Those are things that a starting quarterback can't do. So if that gets you benched, that's fine. But this notion that this is all of a sudden going to fix the offense is questionable because of what was going on around the quarterback. None of it was good. The OU defense held up incredibly well, though. Like, Tennessee has a very powerful offense. I like Nico at quarterback, and that OU defense kept them in the game. And they go now to Auburn, where Hugh Freeze is searching right now on the offensive side. Searching is to say it nicely. They've got a quarterback dilemma on their hands. They're bouncing between Peyton Thorne and Hank Brown. The two combined to throw 4 interceptions between them in the loss to Arkansas last week. They've got Keandre Lambert-Smith. He's a former Penn State player, one of the few bright spots for Auburn this year. He's coming off a game where he went for 150 and 2 touchdowns in that Arkansas game. But the turnovers are the key thing here for Auburn, and Oklahoma's defense is excelling taking the ball away. Auburn has turned the ball over 14 times this year. That's tied for the most in college football. 14 turnovers. Oklahoma's defense has 12 takeaways. That's tied for the most in college football. So you've got the best defense as far as takeaways going up against the worst offense as far as takeaways. What do you think is going to happen? Every key to the game in the history of television has always started with one thing. One. Turnovers. That's where games are won and lost. Oklahoma gets them. Auburn gives them. That's why I'm riding with Oklahoma. I think people are going to wrongly say like, oh, Hawkins is going in there at quarterback and he's going to be better than Arnold and that's the fix. No. It's going to be the defense getting turnovers that are going to win this game. Oklahoma's RPO run game system is not very good. That doesn't mean RPO in general that other people run is bad. I'm not saying that the RPO is bad. I'm saying that the way that Oklahoma runs their RPOs is not very good. It is defensible. The more they get away from that and they spread the field for Hawkins, who's a young quarterback, define the look of the defense and allow him to attack, whether it's with his legs or his arm, the more success he'll have. That's the reason he looked better late in the game against Tennessee than Arnold did early in the game. Arnold can be benched. That's fine. You can bench him. But this idea that Hawkins can run the RPO system better than Arnold when every piece around the quarterback is not succeeding is a little bit of a fallacy. It's going to come down to turnovers. I like Oklahoma in this game, and I do like it to be low scoring because both offenses are struggling. 17-10, Sooners get the win on the road, and they cover. They're a 2.5-point favorite. I think that's really low for a team that lost to Cal at home, let's be honest. And so I've got OU 17-10 over Auburn on the road. Louisville at Notre Dame. Okay, so Louisville is actually ranked one spot ahead of Notre Dame. They're 15. Notre Dame is 16. Notre Dame is 6.5-point favorites for Marcus Freeman. Remember, Louisville, beat this Notre Dame team last year in that great environment in Louisville in a night game. Notre Dame beat Miami of Ohio 28-3 last week, and they've outscored their last 2 opponents since losing to Northern Illinois 94-10. Okay, so this offense has a bit of urgency. Okay, if Notre Dame wants to make the playoff, they're not only going to have to run the table, at least in my estimation, but they're going to have to do it in such an impressive fashion. And this might be one of the last kind of like bullets in the chamber as far as a resume builder is concerned. They've got to win this game, and I think that they've got to win this game handily at home. They're not getting much out of the passing game with Riley Leonard. He's yet to throw for 165 yards in a game this season. He's been better with his legs, back-to-back yards, 100-yard games running the football. And Notre Dame, that offensive line have been ravaged by injuries. So that's part of the reasons why they haven't been great throwing the ball is just the protection and pressure issue on Riley Leonard. But the defense has been very good. The defense is excellent. The defense has only allowed 3 total touchdowns all season. Okay, all season. So this is going to be tough for Jeff Brom and this Louisville team. He's got the Cardinal back in the top 15 for the second time in his 2 years there as head coach at his alma mater. Tyler Shuck is leading that offense. He's the quarterback, 283 yards per game. He's got 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I do trust Notre Dame's defense in this one, though. Okay? Notre Dame at home against Jeff Brom and Louisville, because of last year and the way that this game went against Louisville, I think you're going to get some of that extra motivation from some of those Notre Dame players, and they understand that their backs are against the wall. If they want a postseason berth, this is one of those games that everybody is going to point back to. You want to make us forget about Northern Illinois? You got to handle Louisville. Now, having said that, I just don't think this offense can run and hide from anywhere. And Jeff Brom is a terrific play caller with a veteran quarterback in Shook. So while I think Notre Dame wins this game at home, I don't think that they cover the 6.5. I think that they win 24-20, and the Irish get the win, 24-20. Oklahoma State and Kansas State, two teams that are both coming off of losses. Oklahoma State lost at home to Utah, and Kansas State lost on the road and got handled, kind of manhandled by BYU. That one was shocking. So now we go into this and it's like, well, what should we expect from this ranked matchup? K-State is ranked 23rd. Oklahoma State is ranked 20th. Hard to tell what we're going to get from this one. Kansas State is favored by 4.5 in this ball game. Okay. Oklahoma State has allowed Utah to run for 249 yards last week. 110 of them came on two big runs. One of those was by the quarterback, by the way. It's not a great sign when you're facing Avery Johnson and company. We saw what they did, Kansas State, speaking of, against Arizona running the football when they were at home. This Pokes defense has allowed 18 plays of at least 25 yards. Coming into this season, the biggest question for Oklahoma State was their defense. Their defense was not strong last year. And they were bailed out by the fact that Ollie Gordon went absolutely crazy. Okay? So 18 plays of 25 yards or more this season is tied with North Carolina State for the worst of any Power 4 team. So this defense for Oklahoma State is a concern. Gundy benched Alan Bowman last week. Then he reinserted him in the fourth quarter. So there's question about what's going on for Oklahoma State on the offensive side. Odd things in this college football year. Oklahoma State, their team, their returner, their Doak Walker award winner from last year, their entire offensive line, they're all coming back, and all of a sudden they can't run the football. It's like, what is going on? Allie Gordon averaging just 44 yards per game in 3 games, 2.9 per carry. How does that happen? How does that happen? Now, I get it. K-State was sloppy against BYU. They allowed a 90-yard punt return touchdown. They allowed a scoop and score. BYU only had the ball for 48 plays on offense, and yet they scored 38 points. Like, that was a weird one. You see, I'm more concerned with Oklahoma State because there are foundational things that I'm concerned with. The defense gives up too many big plays. They can't run the football with the experienced offensive line and Ollie Gordon. They're bouncing back and forth between quarterbacks. Meanwhile, Kansas State looks great one week, then just like madness happens another. They get all these funky touchdowns scored against them, and they lose, and you're like, well, they're not any good. No. They're foundationally much more sound than Oklahoma State is. So I like the Wildcats in this game going back home. I think that they get back on track. They clean up some of those things that happened to them against BYU, and I think Kansas State wins this one, and I do think that they cover the 4.5. I've got Kansas State 31-24. 31-24 at home, and they cover that 4.5. Colorado at UCF. UCF is favored by 15.5. I've seen it 14, 15, 15.5. Like, I think that's a big number. I think that's a wildly large number, and I don't think that's just because I went to Colorado. Remember, folks, tune in 10 Eastern. Big Noon Kickoff is going to be live from Orlando. This game is going to be on Fox at 3:30. So right before the Michigan-Minnesota game, Big Noon Kickoff is going to be in Orlando for this UCF-Colorado game. Tune in. That game, again, is at 3:30 Eastern. Kevin Kugler, Jason Benetti, Brock, Allison, all of them, they're going to be there. Kugler's in for Benetti, I should say. So he's in with Brock Heward and Allison on that game. Colorado is coming off that huge win against Baylor, okay? So you know that they're going to feel good about themselves. Generally speaking, Colorado, under Deion Sanders, has not fared well after wins. They've gotten a little bit high on the horse, and they come out and they don't play well the next week. Even when they beat TCU and then Nebraska the next week, it was really sloppy in that first half. Really sloppy in that first half. And then the following week, remember, they beat Colorado State. I'm speaking of early last year. They beat Colorado State, and it was like, man, they had to go to overtime. That was a sloppy game. The best game they played was TCU. And then now this year, the best game that they played was Colorado State. And then they kind of slogged through and beat Baylor. So how do they handle success? That's the mark of a mature team, is how they handle success. Can you be your own standard? Can you set your own standard, and can you maintain it? They won that game in overtime, coming off that Hail Mary. UCF, meanwhile, coming off a bye, and they're starting this season 3-0. And this looks to be a team that could be an upper echelon Big 12 team potentially. UCF has the best run game in the nation so far. So this Colorado defense, which has been better against the run, is going to have to face their best opposition as far as running the football under this Gus Malzahn offense. 376 yards per game on 55 carries per game. That's more than Michigan. Like, here we go. Gus Malzahn, smash football. Running back R.J. Harvey is averaging nearly 150 yards per game. KJ Jefferson, remember, he was the Arkansas quarterback, transferred in. He's a load when he gets to running. Just ask Texas from a few years ago. Baylor QB Sawyer Robertson ran it for 80 yards versus CU last week. So there is an opportunity to run the football with the quarterback. Here's what happens with Colorado. They play far too much man defense in the secondary. And when you play man and lose the quarterback and contain, big plays happen. Really big plays. And that's where they get hurt the most. Okay, so while they have been decent in their run front, stopping traditional run games, they do not fare well against quarterback run, which is what they're going to get against this UCF team with KJ Jefferson. If you look last week, TCU passed it for over 400 yards against UCF in that ball game that was 2 weeks ago. UCF was the benefit of the missed field goal, so TCU really was in position to win that game. Misses the field goal late. They gave up, UCF, 7 passes of 20 or more yards. I think this is a high-scoring game because you've got on one side, right where Colorado could struggle, quarterback run. That's exactly what UCF can do in a big way. On the other side of the ball, Colorado has the ball. Where's UCF struggling? Defending the pass. What can Colorado do? Throw the football. So I firmly expect this to be a pretty high-scoring affair. I don't expect either of these defenses to have a large amount of success. I would say Colorado has shown the ability to adjust in the second half. They have not given up over 7 points in any second half so far this season in any of their games. The sacks obviously are a concern, but more so it's that when you play man coverage, you get beat by the quarterback run. And Colorado, for two and the better part of now 2.5 years, a season and now a quarter, they don't stop the quarterback run. I think that's where it's at. I think that's where the game is at. As much as I'd like to say, like, hey, you know, like Travis Hunter is so good and he's going to get a pick and Shedeur can beat that defense and throw the football. That might all be true. The problem is that UCF should be able to control the tempo and pace and style of the game because of the quarterback run. I think KJ Jefferson runs the ball for over 100 yards. I think it's a high-scoring affair, but I do think Colorado covers. I see this game as like a 42-35 style of game. Like a lot of touchdowns, a lot of excitement. Colorado covers the 15.5. I've got it at 15.5. But I think that they lose on the road because the quarterback run is just going to be too much. They've got to get away from that man coverage in the secondary. It's hard. It's a catch-22. You have Travis Hunter. You want to play man coverage because he's one of the best man coverage players in the country. So if you play zone, you don't feel like you're gaining the benefit of him individually. The problem is that everybody else doesn't cover to the level that he does. Then they start running around and the quarterback gets loose and they give up big plays. I would expect KJ Jefferson to get loose, and I think Colorado is going to get beat on the road. Again, 42-35, but I think Colorado covers in that game. So there you go. There are the previews. There are the picks. Whew, I cannot wait for this one on Saturday, Minnesota and Michigan. That's Big Noon Saturday. Big Noon Kickoff has got that UCF-Colorado game. They'll be there before the game on Fox at 3:30. And, folks, it's a huge weekend of college football, as it always is. Leave a comment below in the YouTube if you want us to start that schematic series, and we'll try to start working on that. But as it stands right now, just enjoy the weekend of college football. And if you're in the middle of that hurricane track, stay safe out there, down there in the South.